41 years of matrimonial commitment have imparted a singular lesson on the nature of betrayal. It possesses no preamble. It simply infiltrates, cloaked in the guise of a loved one. My name is Charles Harlow, a man of 68 years, whose existence has been inextricably linked to the aquatic realm in myriad capacities. From boyhood, when ownership of a vessel was an unattainable dream, to manhood, where I established a company that enabled countless others to embrace the allure of the water. Harlow Boat Works commenced its journey from a modest, rented berth at the Traverse City Marina, a foldable card table, and a coffee can brimming with brass fasteners. For decades hence, its dominion has expanded to encompass 4 full-service marinas stretching along the Grand Traverse Bay shoreline, from Elk Rapids southward to Charlevoix, and a boat-building facility that, to this day, meticulously crafts wooden runabouts by hand, catering to those who appreciate that certain creations transcend the synthetic. My wife, Clara, was the bedrock of our endeavors. While I architected the business, she cultivated the sanctuary of our home, rendering the enterprise profoundly worthwhile. Then, 9 months ago, on a placid Sunday morning, indistinguishable from any other I had experienced, I discovered her on the kitchen floor. The medical pronouncement was a cerebral aneurysm, an abrupt, unheralded event. A Saturday evening spent in laughter, extinguished before Sunday's coffee had finished brewing. Unbecant to me then, that Sunday morning marked only the initial seismic disruption to my world. It would not be the last. The sole tangible remnant Clara left behind, something I could still grasp, resided in the boathouse behind our residence on Old Mission Peninsula. It was a 1958 Chris Craft Capri, its mahogany hull adorned with chrome accents, a testament to craftsmanship that has largely vanished due to an eschewed appreciation for its demanding precision. Clara acquired its dilapidated state at an estate auction 25 years prior for $400. She then dedicated every spare moment of the subsequent quarter-century to its resurrection. She meticulously sourced original hardware from a salvage yard in Wisconsin. She planed replacement ribs from white oak she had seasoned herself. She painstakingly removed 7 layers of accumulated varnish using only a heat gun, a scraper, and a vocabulary that would have made a sailor blush. She christened the vessel the Grace. Others on the peninsula, however, simply referred to it as Clara's boat, for its ownership was never in doubt. Since her passing, I had made a ritual to visit the boathouse each morning before the shop opened. There in the Grace, with my coffee in hand, I would inhale the mingled scents of varnish, cedar, and something subtler, something I swore was an echo of her essence. It was the only sanctuary where the chasm of her absence felt less profound. On that particular Monday morning, coffee mug in hand, I opened the boathouse door and froze so abruptly that the mug nearly slipped from my grasp. The boat lift stood empty. The cradle where the Grace had rested for the past 2 decades held nothing but a residual puddle of fresh water and a stark, clean rectangle of concrete, untouched by the 25 years of accumulated dust. The boat had vanished. My initial surmise was theft. My subsequent thought, once the initial panic subsided enough for logic to reassert itself, was that theft was illogical. The boathouse door had been secured, as always. No signs of forced entry, no damaged hinges. The security camera, a precaution Clara had insisted upon after a burglary 2 houses down, had recorded only in deserted dock at 3 in the morning. Then, at 11, a blank segment. The feed had been deliberately interrupted. Someone with intimate knowledge of the junction box location had orchestrated this. Only 3 individuals possessed a key to that boathouse and the code to the camera system. Myself, Joe Marchetti, our long-serving caretaker, who was presently unreachable on a fishing excursion in the Upper Peninsula with his phone switched off. And my son. I attempted to rationalize, to construct plausible explanations that morning, many of which would later prove to be entirely erroneous. Once the initial shock receded sufficiently for coherent thought, the practical reconstruction of events became alarmingly clear. Derek possessed his own boat trailer, the same one he utilized each summer for his personal runabout, and he knew our private ramp intimately, more so than anyone outside the immediate family. He had no need to resort to any form of damage. He gained entry with his own key, maneuvered the trailer down the ramp before dawn, winched the Grace from its cradle, and departed before the morning chorus of birds began next door. Bennett had indicated a delivery expectation the preceding afternoon, implying Derek had loaded a vessel, transported it nearly an hour up the peninsula to Charlevoix, finalized a sail, and returned in time to pack for a transatlantic voyage. This entire sequence, compressed into an impossibly tight time frame, suggested meticulous planning executed days in advance. Such swift and seamless execution could only stem from premeditation. My hands trembled with such intensity that it required 2 attempts to unlock my phone and dial Derek. He answered on the 4th ring, and the instant I detected the ambient noise, the flat, echoing announcements, the murmur of hundreds of unfamiliar voices, I knew he was far from Traverse City. "Hey, Dad. A bit occupied at the moment. Where are you, Derek?" "Cherry Capital Airport. Actually, we're boarding in 20. Lauren and I are finally taking that trip to Europe we've been discussing." "Where's your mother's boat?" A pregnant pause ensued, not of guilt, but of annoyance, as if I had interrupted something critical to inquire about an inconsequential detail. "Okay, try not to panic." "Where is it?" "I sold it. Bennett took it off my hands yesterday. He gave me a fair price. Everyone's content." The word struck me with the force of a collapsing dock piling. I had to brace myself against the workbench to maintain my footing. "You sold your mother's boat, Dad. Mom's been gone nearly a year. That boat was just sitting in storage, accumulating dust and incurring insurance expenses. It serves no purpose rotting away in a boathouse. 25 years of her life was invested in that boat, Derek. It wasn't yours to sell. Technically, it will be mine eventually, won't it? I'm your only child. I merely expedited the timeline a bit." A boarding announcement blared in the background, and he raised his voice above it. "Look, Lauren has been having a difficult time since the funeral. She needs this trip. First class, the works. I did it for her. You always emphasize that family comes first. I'm simply mirroring your philosophy." I nearly laughed, but the irony was devoid of humor. Lauren had not shed a single tear at Clara's funeral. At the reception, she had complained about the caterer's dry chicken. "Get over it, Dad. It's just a boat. We'll talk once we've landed." The line went dead. I stood in that desolate boathouse, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to silence. A chilling clarity settled in my chest, displacing the earlier panic. The fundamental truth of operating a business for 40 years is the ability to discern a flawed narrative before its inconsistencies are fully articulated. A first-class European excursion for 2, even a luxurious one, would not exceed approximately $35,000, perhaps $40,000, assuming Lauren had secured every available suite. I knew precisely the value of the Grace, as Clara and I had it appraised for insurance 3 years prior. A fully restored, matching numbers 1958 Chris Craft Capri in such pristine condition commands closer to $300,000, and potentially more for a discerning collector. Derek was indeed arrogant, capable of thoughtless disregard for others' feelings, a trait that still surprised me at 39 years of age. However, he was not unintelligent, and he had never, in his life, relinquished $260,000. The trip was not the motivation, it was a pretense. And I had yet to comprehend the true depth of the deception. I was still contemplating these calculations when my phone rang again. An unknown number, an area code from Charlevoix. Mr. Harlow, this is Oscar Bennett from Bennett Classic Boat Brokerage. I acquired a boat from your son yesterday, the Capri. I'm aware, I replied. Sir, you really need to come down here today, if you are able. There is something your wife left inside the boat, and I believe you should see it before I proceed further with this matter. How did you obtain my number, Mr. Bennett? And how does a broker disburse such a substantial sum without verifying the recipient's identity? He did not receive the entire amount, not by a considerable margin, and he will not. It is standard procedure for transactions exceeding $50,000 involving a power of attorney. I issue a deposit, retain the remainder in escrow, and do not release any portion of the balance until the title has cleared the state and has been held for 30 days. That Capri is still registered to you and a Mrs. Clara Harlow. It was never retitled to your son. He presented a letter purportedly notarized and signed by you, along with an identification that matched the family name. It appeared sufficient for a deposit check. However, it was not sufficient for me to transfer $260,000 to a stranger, regardless of a power of attorney. That's not caution, sir. That's simply how the paperwork functions for a vessel of this caliber. Your name was clearly indicated on the registration, and in this industry, everyone around this bay is familiar with Charles Harlow. It took me a mere 2 minutes to locate your office number. I intended to contact you regardless before releasing any further funds. And then I discovered what your wife had concealed behind the dashboard. At that point, today ceased to be about the paperwork. A deposit, not the final sale. Whatever Derek absconded with at that airport gate was not the vessel's true value. It was merely enough currency to cover 2 plane tickets, with the remainder frozen in an escrow account the moment I answered this call. And that letter bore my name. I had not signed anything. I had not been asked to sign anything. Whatever Derek presented to him was fabricated, and Oscar Bennett had just disclosed as much without either of us uttering the word forge aloud. What did she leave? I would prefer to show you rather than discuss it over the phone. However, Mr. Harlow, whatever your son may have told you regarding his reasons for selling this boat, I do not believe it to be the genuine motive. I discovered a metal box zip-tied beneath the dashboard behind the gauge cluster. Someone deliberately concealed it. Well, it was not intended for anyone to find but your wife. I had no recollection of ending the phone call, nor of the 40-minute drive up the peninsula to Charlevoix. What I distinctly recall is standing in Oscar Bennett's establishment 40 minutes later, gazing upon a small, fireproof lockbox resting open on his workbench. Within it lay a flash drive, a sheaf of folded papers secured by a rubber band that had long since become brittle with age, and a spiral-bound notebook filled with handwriting I would have recognized anywhere in the world. Clara's handwriting. "I almost didn't call you," Oscar admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "I assumed it was just old paperwork." Then I opened the notebook. I picked it up with hands that were not entirely steady. The first page was dated a little over 2 years prior, months before Clara's passing. The initial entry read, "If anyone other than myself ever discovers this, something has already gone awry, and Charles must be apprised of everything." I looked up at Oscar. He was observing me with the cautious, sympathetic gaze of a man who already suspected he had handed a widower a device of immense destruction. "Mr. Bennett," I managed to keep my voice remarkably steady. "I require you to retain possession of this vessel. Do not sell it. Do not move it. Do not touch it. I will cover any costs associated with its preservation here." "Sir, I had already surmised as much," he replied, nodding toward the notebook in my hands. "Whatever is contained within I sincerely hope it is not as dire as it appears. It was worse. I remained in the cab of my truck in Oscar Bennett's parking lot for a considerable duration, engrossed in my late wife's handwriting illuminated by the dashboard's glow. By the time I concluded, two profound realizations had crystallized with absolute clarity. Firstly, Clara had harbored suspicions of impropriety at Harlow Boat Works long before I had. Secondly, whatever that issue entailed, its scope far exceeded a mere boat sail facilitated at an airport gate. The notebook was not a personal journal. It served as a ledger, meticulously documenting dates, financial figures, and initials in lieu of full names in certain instances, suggesting a degree of uncertainty about whom she could implicitly trust to commit details to paper plainly. Payments were recorded to a vendor account that did not correspond to any actual entity. A recurring pattern of invoices from our Charlevoix and Elk Rapids locations showed a quarterly surge, subsequently and subtly rectified before the annual audit. Interspersed within the numerical entries, in the margins, were her own observations in blue ink. Does not add up. Inquired with SR regarding the Pusky account discrepancy. Received a narrative concerning a software malfunction. Not convinced. Will review the past 3 years of statements myself. SR, my vice president of operations for the preceding 12 years, was a man named Brian Cole. I had personally hired him. I had delivered a toast at his wedding. I had entrusted him with the keys to 4 marinas and every financial transaction conducted within them. The final entry in the notebook, dated 11 days before Clara's demise, read, "Discovered the wire transfers. Cayman accounts. Brian is not acting alone. A second signature is present on the authorization, and it is not his. Speak with Charles on Sunday. Everything is on the flash drive. Do not let this be buried with me." I reread that final sentence 4 times before the words fully registered in my consciousness. She had discovered it. She had uncovered the entirety of it days before her death and had never had the opportunity to inform me. And whoever possessed the second signature had spent the subsequent 9 months assuming dominion over the funds and the silence. My phone still held a single bar of battery life when I contacted Diane Frost, my attorney and Clara's closest confidant outside of our immediate family. It was nearly 9 o'clock in the evening. She answered on the second ring, as she invariably did for me, and I recounted the entire saga. The empty boathouse, the airport phone call, the lockbox, the notebook, the initial SR, and the unnamed second signature Clara never had the chance to identify. A prolonged silence stretched across the line before Diane finally responded, her voice adopting a flat, cautious tone that signaled genuine concern. "Charles, listen to me very carefully. Do not contact Brian. Do not contact Derek. Do not inform anyone at the company that anything is amiss. Ensure that flash drive is delivered to a forensic accountant I trust before sunrise tomorrow. And let us ascertain the full extent of this situation before anyone has an opportunity to shred a single document. Diane, if Clara discovered this 11 days before she died." Don't go there just yet, Charles. We do not possess concrete evidence of anything beyond your wife's suspicion of fraud. Let us obtain proof before we succumb to anger. Anger leads to lawsuits. Proof leads to justice. I remained seated in the darkened cab of my truck for a substantial period after our conversation concluded, the notebook resting on the passenger seat as if it might impart further revelations if I waited long enough. Across the water, the lights of Charlevoix began to illuminate one by one, and somewhere over the Atlantic, my son and his wife were soaring 35,000 feet above the ocean, imbibing champagne funded by a pilfered vessel, utterly oblivious to the fact that the ground beneath them back home had just fractured open, threatening to engulf us all. I still lacked a name for that second signatory, possessing only a foreboding intuition I desperately hoped would prove unfounded. And I had no inkling that when that name finally surfaced, the individual responsible for the largest outflows of capital from the country would not be the one I most feared. By the second morning, a name had materialized on a spreadsheet where a signature should have been, a development I still struggled to comprehend. Diane's forensic accountant, a sharp and no-nonsense woman named Nina Patel, met us at Diane's office at 7 in the morning, the flash drive already uploaded to a laptop that remained constantly under her supervision. It took her less than 3 hours to meticulously and irrefutably lay out, in stark numerical terms, the precise nature of my wife's discovery. For a period exceeding 3 years, funds have been systematically siphoned from the Charlevoix and Elk Rapids marine accounts through a fictitious vendor known as North Shore Marine Supply, a company that, based on Nina's investigation, existed solely on paper and maintained a bank account in the Cayman Islands. Brian Cole's authorization appeared on nearly every invoice and wire transfer approval, particularly those requiring a secondary executive signature for amounts exceeding a certain threshold. There was, unequivocally displayed on the screen, Derek Harlow. Nina observed my reaction with the careful concern one might show a man precariously perched on a precipice. He has possessed signing authority on the corporate account since assuming the role of regional manager 4 years ago, Mr. Harlow. I wish to be clear before you draw any hasty conclusions. A signature does not automatically imply complicity. Some executives sign what is presented to them without scrutinizing every detail. My son meticulously reviews everything. My jaw tightened. He negotiated his own trust fund distribution schedule at the age of 26. He does not sign documents without thorough examination. Diane gently placed a hand on my arm. Then let us confirm the facts definitively before we engage him further. If he is involved, we will address it appropriately. If he is not, we will protect him. A small, stubborn part of me clung to the hope that Nina's findings were mistaken. That vestige of hope dwindled with each passing hour. Nina dedicated the remainder of that day and most of the following one to tracing the financial flows, and the unfolding narrative proved more disturbing than mere avarice-driven fraud. It depicted a calculated deception, meticulously executed over years by an individual possessing an intimate understanding of our accounting protocols, an understanding I had personally imparted. Initial diversions were minor, easily dismissed as rounding discrepancies or vendor overcharges, but they escalated once the absence of scrutiny became apparent. The total sum, upon Nina's completion of the wire transfer tracing, amounted to just over $2.1 million over a 3-year period, channeled through North Shore accounts. One account was under Brian Cole's name, and another was linked to a holding company registered to an address in Grand Rapids that, after a day of diligent investigation, traced back to Lauren. Not Derek. Lauren. Nina slid a printed document across the table. Your daughter-in-law established the second account 18 months ago. She handled the registration agent details, filing fees, all the associated work. She is the individual who initiated the largest transfers out of the country. I leaned back in my chair, recalling every family gathering where Lauren had artfully steered conversations toward hypothetical joint vacations. Every instance, she had casually alluded to financial constraints on Derek's regional manager's salary, despite my precise knowledge of its considerable amount. I remembered the carefully curated display of grief at Clara's funeral, her tears flowing only as long as it took for others to notice, and not a second longer. I had not yet realized that Lauren was not merely an accomplice in this scheme. She was its architect. Derek and Lauren returned to Michigan on the 5th day, exhibiting signs of jet lag and tan from their travels, their luggage brimming with duty-free purchases, completely unaware of the situation awaiting them. I requested their presence at the house that evening, informing Derek that I wished to discuss the boat, nothing more, maintaining a level tone, keeping the trap discreet until the moment of closure. Diane sat in the adjacent room with the door slightly ajar, a recording device active as per her explicit instructions, and Nina's comprehensive report lay within a folder on the kitchen table. Derek entered first, his demeanor relaxed and sun-kissed, already speaking before he had fully crossed the threshold. "Dad, before you begin, I acknowledge the boat situation was poorly timed, but I've already explained my reasons." "Sit down, Derek." Something in my voice halted his utterance mid-sentence. Lauren followed him, engrossed in her phone, barely glancing up. I kept my gaze fixed on Derek. "I want to discuss North Shore Marine Supply." The atmosphere in the room became palpably still. Lauren's thumb ceased its movement on the screen. "Never heard of it," Derek responded too quickly. "That's interesting, because your signature appears on 11 wire transfer authorizations directing company funds to a North Shore Marine Supply account in the Cayman Islands over the past 3 years. $2.1 million, give or take. Dad, I endorse 100 documents weekly. If Brian ever presented something to me, I would not sign it." My tone emerged harsher than I intended. "Do not do that. Do not make this issue about Brian's administrative tasks. Your mother discovered this before her passing, Derek. She meticulously recorded everything. Dates, figures, your initials precisely alongside Brian's. She had intended to inform me that very Sunday morning. The same Sunday morning that I found her on the kitchen floor. She never had the opportunity because the aneurysm claimed her first." Lauren's complexion had shifted to the hue of aged parchment. Derek parted his lips, and no sound emerged. In the secondary account, I proceeded, my voice more measured than I actually felt, the one that received the most substantial financial inflows. That particular account is not registered under Brian's name at all. It is registered to a corporate entity established by you, Lauren, 18 months ago in Grand Rapids. I want you to comprehend something about that particular juncture. I have successfully negotiated agreements for maritime vessel construction valued more than my son's complete net worth, all without a flicker of change in my demeanor. In that kitchen, observing my daughter-in-law's countenance visibly crumble in real time, my hands trembled so violently I was compelled to press them flat against the tabletop. "Dad, pay attention," Derek began. "I refuse to entertain another falsehood within this residence." I planted both my palms flat on the surface of the table. "Not a single additional one. Your mother dedicated 25 years to the restoration of a vessel using her own hands, and you fabricated a power of attorney document to expedite its sale within a single afternoon, enabling you to purchase airline tickets with funds you had already been pilfering for 3 years preceding that. Remove yourselves from my home, both of you. My legal counsel will initiate contact. You cannot simply. I built this enterprise from a card table and a coffee can, Derek. I absolutely can." They departed. I remained alone in that kitchen for an extended duration after the door had closed, attuned to the silence in the same manner one listens to a wound to gauge its severity. I believed that confrontation constituted the most challenging aspect. I was mistaken in that regard as well. The most arduous part was still 3 weeks away, and it would originate from Brian Cole's utterance, not from my son's. I confronted Brian Cole on the 6th day in his own office, with Diane by my side, and Nina's comprehensive financial trajectory laid out in print and positioned on the desk between us, akin to a weapon primed for discharge. I anticipated denial. I anticipated indignation. What I received instead bore a resemblance to liberation. as if a man had relinquished a burden he had borne for so long that his shoulders had forgotten their proper alignment. Brian refused to meet my gaze. Your son approached me 4 years ago, fresh from his promotion to regional manager, lamenting the constrictive nature of his salary compared to his perception of his worth as your sole offspring. Lauren possessed extravagant tastes, and Derek harbored resentment over receiving a title without the corresponding financial compensation he felt was due. I informed him it was not my concern. He rubbed his face with both hands. He returned a month later with the shell vendor concept already fully conceptualized. North Shore assured it would be inconsequential, discreet, and entirely overlooked. I should have entered your office that very same day and divulged everything. Heaven knows I should have. Instead, I succumbed to his persuasion and agreed to a share of it. And once you're entangled, Charles, you are irrevocably so. There exists no clean exit from such a predicament. My wife discovered it. I allowed that statement to resonate within the room for a moment. 11 days prior to her demise, she uncovered it, and she was poised to inform me on a Sunday. She never had the opportunity. Brian's complexion paled. I was unaware of that. I assure you, Charles, I had no inkling Clara had unearthed anything. Did Derek? A prolonged silence ensued. I cannot be certain. However, I am aware that he commenced accelerating the transfers approximately 3 weeks before her passing. I had always surmised that it was simply him becoming more avaricious. Now, I'm contemplating whether he was aware of her proximity to discovery. I wish to state that remark had no impact on me. That would constitute a falsehood. I wish to assert that I did not spend that entire night pondering whether my own son had witnessed his mother begin to unravel a deception he was perpetrating and had simply opted to expedite its progression rather than halt it. I devoted every hour of that night to precisely that contemplation, and I have never arrived at a resolution with which I could coexist. Nina's complete forensic report was dispatched to the United States Attorney's Office on the 9th day. Diane's immediate notification upon observing Cayman wire transfers within the file. Wire fraud that traverses international borders does not remain a localized issue for long. Diane had already frozen all accounts to which Derek and Lauren had access at the company, divested them of corporate insurance, and initiated the proceedings to remove Derek as a beneficiary of both the family trust and, ultimately, my estate. Brian submitted his resignation before I had the opportunity to dismiss him and cooperated fully with investigators from the moment the subpoenas were issued, which Diane candidly informed me was likely the sole impediment standing between him and a sentence double the length of what he would eventually receive. Derek and Lauren retained independent legal counsel, a sharp young litigator from Grand Rapids, who attempted for approximately 1 week to argue that the entire matter was an accounting misinterpretation inflated by a grieving father. That contention persisted only as long as it took federal prosecutors to present 11 wire authorizations bearing Derek's signature, a forged power of attorney document used to divest me of the grace, a shell corporation registered in Lauren's name, and a deceased woman's handwritten ledger dated weeks before her death, all entered into evidence with a chain of custody that led directly from a vessel's concealed dashboard compartment to the courtroom. As I sat in that kitchen the evening I expelled my son from my residence, I had no premonition that the coldest facet of this entire ordeal still lay ahead of me. It was not the fraudulent activity itself. It was witnessing a courtroom officially determine, in dispassionate legal terminology, the precise fraction of my family that remained intact. By the time the legal proceedings reached trial, 6 months had elapsed since I discovered an empty boat storage facility on a Monday morning, and I had visibly aged with each passing month. Brian Cole entered into a plea arrangement early on, cooperating fully in exchange for a reduced sentence. 3 years in a federal institution, with restitution ordered for whatever portion of the misappropriated funds could be traced back to accounts he controlled. Directly, he met my gaze precisely once during his sentencing hearing, across a courtroom that had fallen utterly silent, and mouthed the words, "I am sorry." I believed him. It did not alter anything. Derek and Lauren's case proceeded through the entirety of the judicial process. A jury trial, 6 days of witness testimonies, Nina Patel guiding 12 unfamiliar individuals through 3 years of wire transfers with the patience of an educator, and Clara's notebook entered into evidence as Exhibit A. Her handwriting projected onto a vast screen in a courtroom she never had the chance to inhabit. I occupied a seat in the spectators' gallery each and every day. Derek never once turned his head to look in my direction. Lauren glanced at me exactly once on the concluding day, with an expression that continues to elude my complete comprehension. Not regret, not anger, but something more akin to incredulity that any of this had actually transpired to her. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before convicting them both on charges of wire fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, and forgery. The presiding judge, a formidable woman with no further tolerance for excuses by the time sentencing commenced, imposed a sentence of 7 years in a federal facility upon Derek and 9 years upon Lauren, citing the offshore holding company that Lauren had personally structured, the one responsible for laundering the most substantial transfers, as evidence of a more calculated and deliberate involvement than a mere signature could convey, despite her direct participation commencing. Subsequent to her husband's, observing my son stand before a judicial panel in a suit I had procured for his university graduation, hearing an unfamiliar voice, clad in judicial robes, declare the number of years of his life he had bartered for the sale of a vessel and a stolen fortune is not a moment I can articulate to you in the same manner I have conveyed anything else within this narrative. Certain silences defy description. That particular silence resided within my chest for a considerable duration thereafter, refusing to recede. The restitution order facilitated the recovery of slightly over $1.9 million of the original $2.1 million that had been stolen. The majority of it was reclaimed from the frozen offshore accounts before Lauren's legal representatives could finalize their jurisdictional arguments. I did not desire that funds be quietly reintegrated into the company's operational accounts as if nothing had occurred. Clara merited a more dignified resolution than that. Therefore, in collaboration with Diane and a small committee of local physicians, I utilized the recovered assets to establish the Clara Harlow Foundation for Aneurysm Research and Awareness, based right here in Traverse City. This foundation provides funding for early detection screening programs at 3 regional hospitals and research grants aimed at identifying precisely the kind of subtle, asymptomatic warning indicators that tragically removed her from my life on an ordinary Saturday evening. Her name is now associated with hospital equipment rather than the documentation of a shell company. That outcome felt like the only fitting conclusion for those funds. As for Harlow Boat Works, the fraudulent activities exposed a systemic corruption I had been unaware of. I engaged an external auditing firm to meticulously examine every account across all 4 marina locations, replaced half of the senior management team, and this time I did not recruit externally to fill those positions. I promoted individuals from the docks, mechanics, and dock hands, the very individuals who had dedicated 15 and 20 years to the actual construction and upkeep of the vessels, rather than managing spreadsheets about them. The business now operates more efficiently, and frankly, it operates more effectively. The loyalty forged through decades of diligent labor proved to be more valuable than any curriculum vitae adorned with prestigious lettering. I want to convey that the narrative concludes here neatly and definitively. It does not entirely. Certain stories do not culminate in a perfectly tied bow, and I have learned that feigning otherwise serves no one any benefit. Derek occasionally corresponds with me from the correctional facility. I have perused every letter. I have not yet responded to any of them. I am uncertain if I ever will, and I have attained a form of uneasy acceptance regarding this uncertainty. Grief and betrayal do not operate on synchronized timelines, and I will not hasten either process merely to provide a more orderly conclusion for anyone, myself included. What I did undertake on a clear evening, approximately 1 month after the trial concluded, was to drive to Bennett Classic Boat Brokerage in Charlevoix and repurchase the Grace. Oscar had upheld his commitment and retained possession of her throughout the entire period, declining 3 distinct offers from collectors because, in his own words, some vessels are not truly for sale, regardless of what the paperwork might indicate. I compensated him fairly for his efforts and towed her home myself, returning her to the boat storage facility on the Old Mission Peninsula, back to the sanctuary where she had rested for 25 years prior to a Monday morning that I will likely never cease to recall. I frequent that location most evenings now, much as I did before any of these events transpired. I sit within the Grace with a mug of coffee, run my hand along the mahogany that Clara meticulously smoothed with her own 2 hands, and I allow myself to remember her precisely as she deserves to be remembered, not as a minor detail in a fraud investigation, but as the woman who dedicated 25 patient years to transforming a $400 wreck into something worthy of protecting with every ounce of my remaining being. She uncovered the truth before any of the rest of us did. She simply never had the opportunity to voice it aloud. I like to believe that bringing her boat back home and dedicating her name to a hospital research wing, rather than allowing it to vanish into an offshore account, represents the closest I can come to completing the statement she was unable to utter. Betrayal does not always originate from an outsider, nor does it always manifest loudly. At times, it surfaces quietly over 3 patient years, originating from those who possessed every conceivable reason in the world to offer you protection instead. And occasionally, the individual who perceives it is not the one universally anticipated. It is the quiet figure at the workbench, armed with a notebook and pen, who never cease to observe meticulously. Never misinterpret the silence of a man steeped in sorrow as a sign of timidity. And never underestimate the lengths to which a woman who cherished her family sufficiently to construct something with her own hands will go to safeguard it, even in her absence.